Hey everybody, it's Lindsay with High Altitude Astrology, and today I'm going to be doing the chart reading of Justin Bieber. And if you want to follow along, his birth information is March 1st, 1994 in London, Ontario, Canada. And we do have a birth time of 12:56 a.m. So, if we look at his chart, we'll see his creative expression right away. His sun is at 10 degrees of Pisces, and if you think about Pisces, you'll see that a lot of people who are involved in being creative do have Pisces energy in their chart. That's because Pisces, which is ruled by Neptune, has an ability to sense things. It's a water energy, and specifically it's sensing subtle energies. So that's how we get like something like imagination connected with Pisces and with Neptune. It has to do with being able to tune into those subtler levels of energy and then kind of funnel them into manifestation. Now, he also has the planet Saturn sitting next to his sun. Saturn's at 3 degrees of Pisces. So this makes him actually a unique Pisces, because pure Pisces energy is very, it's not contained. But Saturn is totally the opposite. Saturn is about containment. Saturn is about discipline and focus and creating structure. You know, Saturn rules Capricorn, and it's about the manifesting in the material world. So he has Sun and Saturn conjunct in his chart in the sign of Pisces. So this helps him. This helps him to bring his creative energy into some sort of manifestation into the world. Now, he also has, well, and that's obvious through his music, I should say. Now, he also has Mercury conjunct Mars in Aquarius. His Mercury is at 23 degrees, and his Mars is at 25 degrees. Now, Mercury has to do with our thinking and our ability to communicate. And when it's with Mars, that means that there's an ability to take action and an ability to really be courageous when it comes to the things that we think and the things that we say. But in the sign of Aquarius, this is a very open-minded person, also a very, in some ways, kind of scientifically minded person who can take these ideas that come through these Aquarian channels. Aquarian is very insightful and very intuitive, but it's kind of like, aha, let's try it this way. That's Aquarian energy. So that's where his thinking, his Mercury, and his Mars, his ability to take action, the sign that those two planets are in. So I would say this really helps him in his creative process as a Piscean person to come up with ideas and then implement them in his creative expression. Now, what's also interesting is that he has a Libra moon at 24 degrees. You know, Libra moons are somebody who expresses their emotional self through Libran qualities, such as wanting to find balance and harmony. It could be through relating in a way that speaks to the other, because Libra is all about relationship. It's ruled by Venus. And so his emotional expression has this Libran tone to it. And it probably helps because it trines that Mercury and Mars in Aquarius. It probably helps him to ground his emotions and his feelings through writing and through communicating in his work. Again, Moon in Libra, you know, that's a very emotive person when it comes to wanting to really share about feelings related to relationship. And if you think about a lot of his songs, I mean, that's really what he sings about. And it's really what creates his fan base too, because I feel that they relate to that, and they enjoy hearing that from him, but they can also relate to what he's singing about, which are from what I can remember, often his challenges in relationship or his feelings, about relationship. Now, that moon in Libra also squares Neptune, and it squares Uranus in Capricorn. So he has a Neptune at 22 degrees, and he's got Uranus at 24 degrees in the sign of Capricorn, and those energies square that moon in Libra. So this is interesting because to have your moon squared Neptune in your chart can basically suggest that at times there might be confusion around the way we feel, because Neptune has this, especially in a square aspect to our emotional self, to our intuitive energy, which has to do with the moon, our subconscious predisposition. When Neptune is squaring it, it can cause confusion. Like sometimes we just aren't sure of how we feel, or we're easily influenced by others, because that Neptunian part of us feels compassion and feels empathy, and then sometimes that energy can in some ways be misplaced because it's squaring our intuition, it's challenging our ability to really know how we feel. And with Uranus next to it too, it suggests that there's just this, in some ways, highly eccentric or erratic part to his emotional nature too, where he can sort of be unpredictable, and he can, act in unexpected ways, or his emotions can change very easily because Uranus is there sort of stirring up the pot all the time. It could relate to some sort of relationship with the mother too. I don't know a whole lot about it. I think she has been involved in his life the entire time. But to have your moon squaring Neptune and your moon squaring Uranus, because the moon relates to the mother, it also relates to where we've come from in our home and family. This could suggest there was some potential like religious views that came from the mother, because that has to do with Neptune. Or there was some kind of just instability in the home growing up, because that has to do with Uranus. So those are a couple of ideas around what having moon squared Neptune and moon squared Uranus could suggest in his chart. What's also interesting about his chart is that he's got Pluto, which is the planet of deep transformation, right on his ascendant. So he has a 29-degree Scorpio ascendant. This is what gives him that sex appeal, because the ascendant deals with how we, in some ways, well, it deals with how we bring ourselves out into the world. It's kind of like the mask that we wear as we're interfacing with the rest of the world. It's not really our solar nature or our lunar nature. It's this other part of us, that it's this sort of filter with which we take everything in through. And his is Scorpio. And that also then can translate into what we physically look like, because the ascendant is the Aries cusp, the first house in the natural zodiac, so it relates to our physical body as well. And then not only is he a Scorpio rising, but then he's got Pluto, the planet that rules Scorpio, sitting right there on that cusp of the first house. This is that intense part of him that we've seen, where he has gotten in trouble in the past for things that he's done. He was egging people's houses, then he was smoking pot, and then he was drag racing while under the influence. So this is that part of him that just there's an intensity to him, and he's going to go through challenges in his life where he's really going to have to go deep and self-reflect and hopefully transform. And we've seen that from him through these processes, especially now in his life. It seems that he's really changed quite a bit. The other thing about that Pluto right on his ascendant is that it squares his Mars and Mercury conjunction in Aquarius. So this is going to really create somebody who is going to have to kind of learn things the hard way sometimes. You know, it just brings a, I want to say kind of like a stubbornness, especially in fixed signs. That Mars conjunct Mercury is in Aquarius, and then the Pluto's in Scorpio. Those are fixed signs, and fixed signs sometimes have a hard time changing because the energy sort of is like in one spot radiating from the inside out, like Leo or Taurus, or like Scorpio, it's radiating from the outside in and it's drawing things to it. So the nature of fixed energy is to kind of hold steady in some ways. So with this Mars conjunct Mercury in Aquarius squared as Pluto in Scorpio, it just means that he's going to go through transformation around the way he thinks and acts. And because it's a square, it could just take some time for him to really kind of learn, you know, that behaving in more selfish ways or in ways that don't take others into consideration is not going to get him to the places that he wants to go in life. He's got an interesting Venus in Pisces at 20 degrees, and that to me is also an indication of his musical ability. Venus can relate to our creative expression, and of course Pisces is the sign of that rules music, so I see that as being part of his connection to his creativity. And then that Venus at 20 degrees of Pisces trines his Pluto at 28 degrees of Scorpio. So this gives his creative expression an intensity, a drive. You know, it makes him very naturally good at focusing and honing his energy on expressing his creative self. And finally, he has this Jupiter in Scorpio in his 12th house. And this to me is symbolic of some of his religious perspectives. Jupiter does deal with our faith, and in the 12th house, that is also a house that relates to transcendence and wanting to move beyond the ego in certain ways, and religion can certainly help facilitate that. And then of course Jupiter in Scorpio, that has to do with transformation. So he seeks deep transformation through his belief. What's interesting about him having Jupiter in Scorpio in the 12th and Pluto on his ascendant is that he really, in some ways, is kind of a dichotomy, because he's got this creative expression through his Sun and his Venus, which is trine the Pluto and trine the Jupiter. But because that Jupiter is there in that 12th, he's really in some ways like a hermit, and he wants to be alone. And it's just interesting that he kind of has both parts of this to himself. And I wanted to read from 8and12houses.com, and they say about having Jupiter in the 12th that they say that you have a strong desire for alone time and solitude. You enjoy being by yourself and prefer to spend time alone. You're sensitive to large groups and would prefer to spend time thinking, writing, and studying deep subjects. You are someone who enjoys spending time in deep thought, and you would like to try to figure out what is the purpose of life. You will benefit by doing anything spiritual, such as meditation, writing, metaphysics, and spirituality. You can connect to spirit easily and are blessed with a deep connection to God. You might seek out this relationship by becoming a nun, priest, or rabbi. So we can see that there's a part of him that really just wants to pull in. And he probably has, a challenge sometimes because he has a job that requires him to be so out there, but there's this other part of him that wants to be more alone. He's definitely changed a lot in the last several years, and some of that has to do I feel, with the fact that transiting Neptune, which has been in the sign of Pisces, has been going over his Saturn and then going over his Sun. Now, if we look at when it was going over his Saturn, that was from April of 2012 to February of 2014. And when we have Neptune transiting any of our personal planets, it's very significant because Neptune takes quite a long time, 175 years, I believe, to get around the solar system. So it's not going to actually touch any of your planets in your lifetime. But for him, Neptune happens to be moving over some of his planets in the last several years. So like I said, it conjuncted his Saturn. And Saturn has to do with, again, the structures of our lives. And Saturn in Pisces, that's the sign of that his Saturn is in. You know, Saturn in Pisces has to learn lessons around empathy and compassion, but also around limitation around things like drugs and alcohol, because again, Pisces is that transcendent desire, and sometimes we want to do it in a way that, you know, gets us there very quickly, and that can happen with drugs and alcohol. So when our Saturn is in Pisces, there could be lessons around that we ultimately have to be learning. And then, of course, when Neptune comes over the Saturn, what it's doing is really asking us to mature spiritually. And I believe that's when he started to get more into his own personal faith. And then I know for sure that on January 9th, 2014, on the tail end of this Neptune conjuncting his Saturn, he was baptized into a church called the Hillsong Church. And he still now, you know, goes to that church and practices this particular faith. And so I see that Neptune on his Saturn as a time where he was sort of, you know, creating some structure, more structure to his faith. Now, also, I didn't mention this before in his natal chart, but his Saturn opposes his Chiron in the sign of Virgo at 5 degrees. So the Saturn's at 3 degrees, and the Chiron is at 5 degrees of Virgo. So Chiron in Virgo, Chiron deals with our wounds, and Virgo has to do with, you know, wanting to have everything organized and everything in some ways kind of in control. So JessicaDavidson.com .uk says about having Chiron and Virgo that the wound is our ability to discriminate and find order, which may manifest in the following ways. Feeling incomplete and impure, like something is wrong with us. Feeling the need to fix ourselves and heal the problem, but can't work out where to start. Feeling dissatisfied with how things are with ourselves and life in general. Nervous tension. Disorganized and messy, or highly organized and obsessively compulsive. Highly focused on health and keeping ourselves healthy. Now it says the gift is the healing journey that involves the integration of parts into a whole and learning to be of real service to others. And the gift is to find integrity through wholeness. When you learn to relax and stop judging everything as wrong or faulty, you'll be able to recognize that wholeness already exists. You don't have to change anything or make yourself perfect. You can learn to love yourself and others as they are and see how the divine plan unfolds through the balance of perfection and imperfection. So in some ways, this probably has given him his drive to become a very good musician, because it opposes that Saturn, which has to do with his work in the sign of Pisces. So he probably has, you know, spent a lot of time really trying to perfect, you know, this part of himself. But what the Chiron is really suggesting is that ultimately the healing comes when we can learn to be easier on ourselves and to to see in some ways, the perfection and the imperfection. And to have that Neptune going over the Saturn, it was setting off this opposition to the Chiron, and it could have just added to this part of him that really wanted to get things under control for himself at this time, or to find more order for himself. Now, what he's been having even more recently is Neptune conjuncting his sun, transiting Neptune, conjuncting his sun, and this started in March of 2016 through February of 2017. And I wanted to read about having Neptune transiting the sun. And this is from the Future Minders, and they say you'll face challenges to your sense of identity, being compelled to find your true purpose in life. It may cause confusion as you question the path you've been on, and you may feel disillusioned with the more material side of your life. You want to experience more spiritual satisfaction in your work and may often feel defeated by the harshness of the material world. Now, if you follow him, you'll know that he actually canceled a tour that he was on in July of 2017. So it was just after this transit of Neptune to his natal sun. And he said that he was canceling the remaining concerts for this year. He was quoted as saying that he loves his fans and hates to disappoint them. This was from his publicist. But after careful consideration, he's decided he will not be performing any further dates. And the title from this article in the New York Times says, Justin Bieber cancels Purpose Tour for tour dates for his, quote, soul and well-being. That just sounds so much like Neptune on your sun. You know, it's like he really needed to take a break, and he needed to, do something different from what he was doing. And it wasn't necessarily something that everybody understood, but he just needed to do this for himself. As you may or may not know, he got engaged recently to Hailey Baldwin. And now, this is somebody that he has dated in the past and has now proposed to. So it's exciting, and it's, this really beautiful relationship that they seem to have. They both go to the same church, and they seem very happy. So that's awesome. And some of the things that I can see might be attributing this to his decision at this time is that he has been having transiting Jupiter conjunct his natal Jupiter in the 12th house. And this started in December of 2017, and it completes in August of 2018. And this is something that happens every 12 years, so it's not extremely common. And, Jupiter just makes us feel very optimistic and positive, like we want to expand our world, and we want to, we feel confident that in the decisions that we want to make, and we want to grow our perspective and grow our world. I mean, this could be a continuation of his faith, his practice of faith, because Jupiter again deals with that, and his Jupiter is in the 12th house. And that Jupiter in Scorpio has also been trining his Venus in Pisces at 20 degrees. So Venus deals with our relationships and our loving energy. So, it's possible that because of this energy, this is being reflected in the decisions that he has, decided to actually settle down with somebody. And, in general, it's just Jupiter is stimulating that loving energy in his chart. Now, the one thing I wanted to look at is moving into the future with his chart, because that Neptune is not done with his chart. It's going to be going over his natal Venus at 20 degrees of Pisces in April of 2020. The future minders say about having transiting Neptune conjunct your Venus is that This time will test your relationships, personal as well as professional, and the effects can be quite confusing. In your existing relationships, you're more concerned with finding a new level of honesty and trust and will become highly idealistic about the way the relationship should work. You may place unrealistic expectations on your partner and then be disappointed when they don't come through. So much of this may go on in your own mind that they don't even realize they're being tested, leaving them very confused. Or they may be the ones wanting to change the relationship and asking you to trust in their intentions. This idealistic cloud makes it difficult to know what's right and wrong, and ideally, you should just do your best to muddle through, and when you emerge from this cycle, you'll have a better idea about how you feel. It can actually be a very productive, creative time, and the future minders also say, and they say as an artist, you may find this period inspiring, and you typically are more attuned to the creative process because aesthetic awareness in general tends to be enhanced. So that's a great way to channel the energy. And the only reason I'm bringing it up is because, you know, he's going into this new relationship. He's going to be getting married. And then, you know, a couple of years from now, this big transit's going to hit. And we can see how Neptune has really affected him as it's moved over his personal planets in the last several years. So this is just another time to be aware. And, you know, if he consulted an astrologer, if he is going through any challenges at that time, it would be useful for him to know that this energy is happening, and you know, to be able to have that knowledge help influence you know, what he's experiencing at that time. So this has been my chart interpretation of Justin Bieber. Thank you so much for watching. If you like my channel, please subscribe. And if you'd like to schedule any kind of astrological service with me, you can find me online at highaltitudeastrology.com. You can also sign up to receive a daily blog email, because I blog on my site about the daily energies. And I just want to thank you again so much, and catch you next time. Adios.